I'm Mark Golub here at the the General Assembly 2014, and we tell you often that there are amazing people on the Jewish scene in the Jewish world who are doing extraordinary work to secure the Jewish future and, in essence, make Jewish life today as much as it can possibly be. And I want to introduce you to an individual who is doing as much as anyone in world Jewry to make sure Jewish life is vibrant and exciting and successful. It is my honor to be sitting with Rabbi Levi Shemtov, the Executive Vice President of American Friends for Lubavitch. He's also the founder and director of the Capital Jewish Forum, which deals with, Jewish members of Congress and their staff in terms of their own Jewish identity. And he is the founder of the Shul of the nation's capital. And you are doing extraordinary work on the Jewish scene, and it is an honor just to sit with you for a few moments. Thank you for sitting with me.
Thank you.
I want to talk a moment about you, and then I want to talk about your work. I want to know how in the world you get to be who you are and where you are in Jewish life. Levi, where are you from?
Philadelphia.
And what kind of Jewish home did you grow up in?
My father was the shliach of the Rebbe to Philadelphia, and then started to go to Washington on behalf of Lubavitch,
Yes.
doing missions which the Rebbe sent him there for. He would sometimes commute once or twice in a week. After going to Washington to help him many times, the commuting turned into commuting for me.
Mm-hmm.
He would come down for major things, but for the more mundane matters, I would go. And it became apparent that Washington was sorely lacking in an ongoing Jewish presence, the type of which Chabad provides around the world. And the Rebbe told me to move there.
The Rebbe told you personally?
Personally.
Wow. How often did you meet the Rebbe?
There were times I would see the Rebbe every week, more than once a week. There were sometimes I would go in between sessions at yeshiva to see the Rebbe on Monday and on Thursday when he would come to hear the reading of the Torah.
Yes.
Shabbos, there would be a farbrengen.
Yes.
Sunday, the Rebbe would distribute dollars for charity, and I would go if at all possible. And sometimes once or twice during the week, sometimes even more than that, to be with the Rebbe when he would either go to the Ohel, where his father-in-law was buried, to pray, and then come back and pray the evening service, Ma'ariv, or any other chance I got, quite frankly, because I wanted to see the Rebbe as much as I could.
He was an extraordinary human being, was he not?
Absolutely.
Levi, most of the people who are watching right now, at best, they've only heard anecdotes. Can you give us a sense of what it was about the Rebbe that was extraordinary in terms of his being a human being that is almost unparalleled?
At the core, a Rebbe is one whose life is not for himself. So watching the Rebbe for so long and in so many ways provided a very vivid example of one whose literal every movement is on behalf of someone else. It's a selflessness that's very hard for a normal human being to even fathom, let alone practice. But imagine someone standing and giving thousands of people $1, a smile, a handshake, an encouragement. And one moment it's the governor of New York, the next moment it's a minister of the Israeli government, the next moment it's a little boy, afterwards it's an old grandmother with a broken heart, followed by an African American from the neighborhood who just decided to come and see what spirituality he might find. Mm-hmm. And the Rebbe would shift between these various people into various languages, into various moods and modes for them, because for him, what you were that might look different than him was a manifestation of your personal identity. But the essence, the soul, is the same.
Mm-hmm. And somehow, he could sense the soul of every person with whom he came in contact.
Well, we believe that that's what a Rebbe is. A Rebbe is a mega soul, if you will. one that encompasses the individualities of the people who he serves. People look at it as following a Rebbe. The Rebbe serves the people and they follow him because without his guidance they just don't feel as complete. And it's very hard to describe a chassid if you aren't a chassid. And I think a lot of the mystery, indeed some of the tension regarding chassidim comes from people who don't understand what it means to be one. But when you are one, you feel like you're in the presence of something great. Try and think about cell phone reception and Wi-Fi. It's a different ballgame with Wi-Fi. It's you're touching something unlimited.
Yes. I want you to talk about that one more moment.
Sure.
Every now and then, one finds in life an individual who somehow, being in that individual's presence, there is, you use the word spirituality. I'm not sure what the right word is, but there's an aura. There's a presence of something larger. Very often the word is the adjective used is divine. There's something of a divine nature in a human being's ability just to look at you and make eye contact, and somehow you're changed by that moment. People who've told me that they had experiences with the Rebbe very often try to explain it to me that way. Does it make sense to you?
It makes absolute sense, and I'll give you a scientific or practical metaphor. You know the way when a bright light is shined at you or a flash bulb, something stays in your eyes well after that. It's not just a regular light. Well, imagine if that can be transformed into a spirituality, by the way, is a phrase which has been used for purposes that are appropriate and for purposes that are not appropriate, but basically means a purposefulness that's not evident. Take eating, for example. For every human being that eats, they want to be full and satiated. For a Jew that eats, they are supposed to bless the food because food is human energy with which you're supposed to make the world better. Now the food is fuel for something better than just the person's sustenance. The Rebbe wanted to teach us that about everything, whether it was technology, whether it was knowledge, whether it was the larger culture of the world. He sort of inoculated us against its dangers by making it incumbent upon all of us to contribute into the system we live in, which of course helps you not be adversely affected by it. Think of an inoculation like a vaccine, or think of some other ways in which limited exposures allow greater growth than maximal exposure, which is sudden. And the Rebbe understood this. He saw the world changing in a way. For example, in the 60s, there was agitation amongst the youth because they felt very frustrated. And instead of just tamping down that frustration and energy, the Rebbe saw that it would be better to channel that energy and take that youthfulness and that vigor and make a revolution that would be positive. You can make a positive revolution. It's a matter of focus. And many times I have to work on matters that can take years.
Yes.
I worked on one letter for 8 years to procure it from a certain agency. And every time we'd have a meeting, I would tell the person, look, I'm more concerned about the direction we're going than the speed we are going at. And I think this is what the Rebbe tried to tell all of us, whatever your discipline was in life, that whatever you are doing, keep us focused on something higher than yourself and beyond yourself. And in that way, you won't feel so selfless. It'll actually complete you in a way which will allow you to do even more. And in that cycle, you take a lifetime of that attitude, and you've got quite a bit to look back on rather than just your own indulgence.
Levi, you said it began in your own home with your father, and then you went out of your way to have as much contact with the Rebbe as you could. Did either your father or the Rebbe have a profound impact on who you are now?
Both.
Tell me.
My father, of course, taught me many things. He invented the type of work that I do, okay? And the Rebbe inspired...
And namely, when you say that, you're referring to the work you do.
When I'm saying the work of Lubavitch in Washington, looking at a larger world and not only not being intimidated by it, but thinking how you can take what's going on there and use it for the purpose of developing Jewish life further. Let me give you two examples. Today, menorahs in public are ubiquitous.
Correct.
And where was the first public menorah on record? Was in Independence Mall in 1974. I remember we used to celebrate Hanukkah when I was a little child. And one year, what we would do is light a menorah at our window like everybody else, all right, by the door. And one year, my father was excited because they put up a menorah which was shorter than I am, about 4 feet or so, 5 feet maybe, in Independence Mall.
In Philadelphia.
Yes, right in front of Independence Hall, actually.
Yes.
And you know, there's a lot of very potent history there and meaning because this is where our rights to do something like that were born, right? And as you know, I saw him here before. I don't know if he's here now, but Nat Lewin defended that right all the way to the Supreme Court twice. Now, 2 years later, we celebrated the bicentennial. And I believe the mayor of Philadelphia was looking for some ways to promote the bicentennial, if I'm not mistaken. And Philadelphia and Lubavitch mean the same thing. Philadelphia is a city of brotherly love in Latin. Lubavitch is a city of brotherly love in Russian. And I think that what they found was, let's make this big menorah in Independence Square. Some people, the year after the Independence Hall one, had put some up around the country. Now they made this huge one. The largest halakhically acceptable dimension was 30 feet high. Put it right up there in Independence Mall. I remember I was a little child, the mayor showed up, and that was like the extent of it.
Was it thrilling for you?
It was thrilling for me because I'll never forget it. I must have been about 8 years old at the time. And I remember that people were murmuring that the mayor's limo was running because it was cold. And the guy says, what a waste of energy. And the other says, well, look at them. They're celebrating how energy got squeezed out for 8 days from 1 day's supply. And it was very soon after the gas lines, 1976. So if you remember going back that far, I remember that impact being made on me. But in any event, a year or two later, he had this idea of putting a menorah up in Lafayette Square in front of the White House. And the Secretary of Interior turned down the application. So he went to a man named Stuart Eisenstadt, a legend in American Jewish life, and asked for his help. And he was the domestic policy chief for President Carter at the time. He called the Secretary of Interior and said, look, you got a choice. Either you're going to reverse yourself and approve this permit, or I'm going to the president on this, and you're going to lose. Next thing they knew, they had the permission for Lafayette Park. At some point, they moved everything out of Lafayette Park, and by then, our celebration had grown to what it is now. We had about 4,000 tickets issued last year. Almost 70 million people saw it on the news, on every major network, and we have the stats to prove it. 1,819 TV clips.
This is the lighting of the Hanukkah menorah.
The national
here in
menorah on
Washington.
the ellipse now.
And you're there doing this now.
Yes, I'm there with my father. We do this together every year. And just if you want to have a little interesting tidbit, how this influenced me. Talk about influence,
Yes.
okay? So obviously, the one on the ellipse in front of the White House is developing with him this large phenomenon now called the national menorah. I mean, if you Google it, you'll see a whole lot of things on the web about it. But when I was in Australia for 2 years training in a community there, somebody had visited the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him, it's the bicentenary of your country. Make sure you use it out for all types of good things. So he comes to the yeshiva and he says to the yeshiva boys, the Rebbe told me to use out the opportunity of the Australian bicentenary for all kinds of good things. Who has an idea? So I told him, I have an idea. Why don't we make the Australian bicentenary Hanukkah celebrations? Australia had just finished building a brand new Parliament House. It was a $1 billion building, a very big phenomenon in the late 80s. The Prime Minister at the time had helped Soviet Jewry to a great extent, one of the biggest activists in the world on behalf of Soviet Jewry. So my idea was, let's bring Jews who emigrated to Australia to the capital, and we will light a menorah in the shape of the famous flagpole at the top of that Parliament House, and that will be the Australian bicentenary menorah. We went to the Prime Minister,
Yes.
and he said, okay. And he came and he was there when we lit it, and he accepted us, or received everybody in the delegation.
There?
Yes, I was 20 years old at the time, and I became the chairman of the committee for the
Fabulous.
Australian Bicentenary Hanukkah celebrations. Then we realized there's only about 200 Jews in all of the capital city. So we brought some buses in, and then we had lots of businessmen who wanted to be there, so we flew in planes, and they let us put decals on with Air Hanukkah on it. Now everybody knew about this. It was on the news, it was in the papers, and once we had the capital covered, We did one in Sydney where we had thousands of people, because it's the summer there, remember? So the
Yes,
weather's nice.
yes.
And then we went to places like the Northern Territory, Adelaide, Perth, and we had celebrations all over the country where thousands of people came. So if you're talking about influence, it influenced me to think about how to take care of, take advantage of that opportunity. Now, as far as the Rebbe influencing him, and thereby influencing me, or the Rebbe influencing me directly.
I want that.
The Rebbe actually paid a lot of attention to what I did there when I was 20 years old, and I have some handwritten answers of the Rebbe, because what we did is we called it Australia Illuminated, and we did it again the second year, but actually advertised in Time magazine in Australia, the Australian magazine, and we published a little book called Australia Illuminated. And the secretary who brought the Rebbe the book told me he was there when the Rebbe flipped through it from back to front, and actually was chuckling as he read it, because he was seeing that I was basically copying this phenomenon that had worked. But which other leader could take a wild 19-year-old, every 19-year-old is sort of wild in their ideas, and harness that kind of energy into something like that? You know, it was just telling everyone to do something with what you have for a larger purpose. That's a universal ethos.
I wanted to also hear from your perspective, and I don't want a Pollyanna answer. You know, I want the answer you give to your closest advisors and friends when you're with them alone. What concerns you now about American Jewish life? And we, you know, we're at the GA together, and we just had the first plenary, and many times the person who was moderating whatever panel there was began with the same mantra. American Jewish life is at a precipice. There's division. There's the Pew report that says people are drifting away. Assimilation is larger. Intermarriage is larger. There's less of a commitment between, for young people vis-a-vis the state of Israel. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned. I'll ask you after that what gives you hope. But before the hope, I want you to define for us what you consider to be one or two of the most serious issues you would like to see Jewish life address.
Okay. Number one is conformity. We live in a world where everything is an arts and crafts project. It's all about me, what I want, when I want it, how I want it, and you don't have to conform to anything. Recently there was a little bit of a debate between two people. One had diverted from what I would say was a conventional Jewish path, and said, this is who I am, and I just got to be honest with myself and not fool the world or me anymore. And he said that the Talmud says that a person has to be sure that he is toichoi kebaroi, which means that his innards and his outward projection are honest and equal. And he said, this is who I am, so this is how I'm going to be. This rabbi challenged him, and I watched this debate in writing, where he said, no. It doesn't say that your outward projection has to be like your innards. It says your innards have to be like your outward projection, which means you have to live your life the way the Torah tells you to live it. And you do the effort on yourself to make sure that inwardly you feel that. That's the Sinaitic experience. That's what makes the Jewish people survive. Nasa v'nishma. First we do what we're supposed to, then of course we study about it forever.
Exactly right.
If you have to understand everything before you're going to keep it, you're undoing the process.
Exactly.
So when you have people, today everyone wants to be a venture capitalist, and today I met an Israeli young talented man. I was at another conference where he shows me his startup, and I told him, honestly, I have never met an Israeli that does not have a startup, right? Because everyone feels that they have to take something that they want to do, and that becomes appropriate for them. It's true that every person is unique. And the Rebbe taught that, by the way, that you have to be who you are, right? But after you've already taken care of the part of your responsibility to your forebears and your those that will come after you, and what you're going to do during the time that you're here. I'm going to share with you a Torah thought that I learned yesterday from a good friend of mine, Avraham Minfeld, right? Who was the president emeritus of
A fabulous teacher, a fabulous man.
a towering figure,
Towering figure.
in Jewish life.
Yes.
And he's an honorary great uncle to us in Washington from his time there. Anyway, he taught a very simple thing which I expounded upon in my sermon, because I'd seen it long ago, but he reminded me about this and elucidated it. The story of Abraham takes two parshas. It takes two Torah readings over 2 weeks to discuss Abraham's life. Why couldn't it just be one long one? And the answer is there's two Abrahams. There's the Abraham who gets the first instruction to the first Jew, which is the Lech Lecha, go forward for yourself. But to go forward for yourself, you got to leave your comfort zones and leave it up to God. That's a very fundamental part of the Jewish journey. The second portion that we read yesterday is Abraham after receiving the first mitzvah that any Jew had gotten. Not the Jewish people in its entirety, that comes later. But the first mitzvah given to the first Jew was the bris, and then Brit Milah, the circumcision, and that's what we discuss when we talk about Abraham in this week's parsha. So what Avraham Avinu was trying to say is, a Jew has two components: the cultural, historical, narrative Jew, and then the implementing, traditional, practical Jew. And you cannot really be only one without the other. You cannot study Jewish history and Jewish culture and Jewish literature even without studying and implementing Jewish practice. Not in the way you want to modify it, but in the way that it's been surviving through the ages to the point we have it today.
Okay, I have to ask you to wrap it up, so I want you to now come back to your point. I asked you what concerns you, and this has been your answer. Because? How does it relate?
It relates because young people today, I'm not going to say feel too liberated, because they have so many opportunities that people before them didn't have, but they feel less of a sense of conformity or discipline in a way, which is not a very good thing.
Right.
And we in the Chabad movement, I was just walking over here with David Suissa, who told me that a Chabad rabbi taught him that his ethos, and this is a man who built up a congregation of a few thousand people in Chabad, said that we're for innovation without compromise. And let me give you a metaphor. We believe in Chabad that Jewish outreach and Jewish life is like a game of tetherball. You know what the game of tetherball is like? So we believe every Jew has to be able to touch the ball. And if we have to, we'll use thousands of meters of rope because we have to reach every Jew. But we never move the pole, because once you move the pole, the game is over.
Fabulous, fabulous metaphor. You do extraordinary work. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha, but I have to get you to promise me we'll continue.
I want to just finish with one sentence.
Do that.
You asked me why I'm hopeful.
Yes.
I'll tell you why I'm hopeful. Because just as there's so much freedom, which has cost us allegiance, tradition, nobody likes to enter a structured system to do their philanthropy. It's all now a dozen people sitting around with what used to be laptops, now iPads, figuring out whether they're going to support Jewish education or grow hemp in Honduras or whatever it's going to be. We have to now, and I don't want to over-metaphorize this interview, but I just want to tell you, society is a sack. And the Rebbe always spoke about this, that you can't leave behind the people who are in the bottom of the sack. The people at the top of the sack are enjoying things, and they get carried away, and sometimes you lift a sack, when you take out a sack of whatever it is, you lift it by the top. But what we have to recognize is the bottom of the sack is not as strong as it used to be. People don't remember the Holocaust survivor grandparents. They don't remember that it's a challenge to be identified as a Jew and what people have to give up for it. If we keep lifting the sack by the top, we have to worry that the load at the bottom might rip the seams and it'll fall out. What the Rebbe taught us to do is take the sack as heavy as it is and lift it from the bottom. The top is raised, the bottom won't fall out.
You keep lifting that sack, my friend. We got to meet again.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Levi Shemtov, Rabbi Levi Shemtov here of Chabad in Washington. It's an honor to talk to him, and I'm glad you had a chance to hear him here at the GA 2014.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.